Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on making a complex sale. My name is Scott Shemwell. I'll be the facilitator for this session today. We'd like to go through a few slides at the beginning, and I'll give you a short demonstration of a tool that we have developed to help facilitate this process. And certainly towards the end, if we have some time, we'll be happy to take any questions. So I'd like to start with first looking at some of the sales misconceptions which still exist to this day. For example, we typically have looked at the used car type salesman as being the quintessential charismatic figure that tries to get you to buy something at all costs. This view continues to exist today, even though we know it's not a very successful business model. Just for those of you in the audience, I actually at one time owned a suit that looked similar to this guy in the picture. So fooling all of the people some of the time and all the time is not a successful sales strategy. The other thing that we see today is this tendency towards online sales, meaning, okay, it's not necessary to visit with customers anymore. You can do it all online. And in fact, this webinar was largely set up through LinkedIn. However, in a complex sales to an enterprise, that's not necessarily a successful strategy in and of itself. It's part of a broader strategy. So the other thing that comes about is we buy on spec. I think most of the people in the audience are selling technology of one form or another, whether it's information technology, engineering, or professional services. So we've all bought little TVs like this. In fact, I bought one this weekend when one of mine failed. They're very similar in specifications. They all look alike. They are all from different manufacturers. I've got some logos down at the bottom. I'm not endorsing any of these companies, and I don't represent them. You'll see me discuss other companies during this session as well, and the same applies to them. I'm not endorsing, nor do I represent them unless I let you know that I am. So if we look at what consumers do, we buy on appearance, we buy on price for sure, and desire, the impulse buy. Sunday morning, my television didn't work, one in the kitchen, so I went over to Best Buy and bought one home within an hour to replace it. It was almost the exact model, but it didn't take me long to go buy one. It's not necessarily the case, however, with the enterprise customers. There has to be an identified organizational need, and we'll talk about that. Certainly price is important, but the value proposition is more important. It has to be fit for purpose. If it doesn't meet an organizational need, it's not probably going to be a successful sale. And also, for most of you are aware that there are procurement agreements in place. For example, when we first started this consulting company about 15 years ago now, one of my first clients was a large IT hardware company. And before I could be paid as a single one-man band entrepreneur, I had to get into their SAP procurement system. That took me some time and effort to do it. The good news is once you're into a procurement system, you tend to stay in there. So the argument that we're going to make today is that while technology often looks alike, is similar in nature, we can in fact differentiate ourselves and identify a value proposition that will cause us to win the deal and not one of our competitors. So making the complex sale, selling to industrial and enterprise customers, has been in the works for a very long time. We'll talk a little bit about the history here. I've been in sales a long time, and some of the tools that you're going to see today were developed a direct result of that. When we talk about industrial type customers, I am generally referring to heavy industries such as oil and gas, power distribution. I was in Europe last November talking to the nuclear power industry about similar type things around safety. A little bit about myself, and I'm not going to spend any time on this because you'll be provided these slides at the end, and this is also being recorded. I've been selling in the industrial sector a long time. It's been my very good fortune to be associated with some very large deals. Currently, the Rapid Response Institute, our consulting company, is focused mostly on operational issues around safety, compliance management, and clearly selling solutions to them. I've been involved with some very large notable companies such as Halliburton and Oracle, and was involved in digital oil field pretty early in its inception, and we'll talk a little about how this solution came out of that. And you can follow me on various social media as well as my blog. So why people buy and not corporations? This is a true story of one of my early early sales efforts. I was working for a company. It was not Foxborough, but a company I believe was acquired by Foxborough later, and I was selling instrumentation primarily to the petrochemical and refining sector in South Texas, everywhere from Beaumont to Brownsville. Most of my work going on the east side, Ship Channel of Houston. I was selling everything from recording devices, sensors, measuring devices, the sort of thing that you see there. There was a project underway with one of the large engineering companies that had a refinery retrofit project, and all of us sales guys wanted to get in to see John, who is the instrument director for that company. A colleague of mine set us up at one of the local Mexican restaurants, and we had lunch. And I was talking to him about all my stuff, all the widgets that I had, as you see on the left. And finally, he looked at me and said, "If I buy from you, will I get promoted?" And I thought, well, I don't know. I didn't say anything, obviously, but I said, how would I know if you're going to get promoted? I'm here to sell you my instruments. But what he was truly looking for was a system. He was responsible for all the instrumentation for that entire project. He wasn't interested in buying a bunch of parts and putting together a kit. He wanted solutions ready to be plumbed and electrically connected. So over the course of the next year, I finally figured that out. And we worked with those guys and worked with our manufacturing facility, which was new business for them as well. And we closed that order. It was the largest order that my company closed that year. It was 10% of our division's entire global revenue. It was my first multi-million-dollar sale. And oh, by the way, John got promoted. I use this story, and it's some years old, because it was really the eye-opener to me on what it takes to sell in the industrial setting. It's not a bunch of products that we have. It's not a bunch of widgets. And I can tell you that we've all got the best widgets. In fact, I'm going to show you a software widget here later that I think is the best widget. But what the customer is buying is what we have to figure out and then meet not just the commercial requirements that he has, but the social and personal issues that an individual has, whether it's to get promoted or keep a job or whatever. So I want to talk a little bit about, and this example is from upstream oil and gas. What are your customers really trying to accomplish? And this is a typical statement taken from the digital oil field. We want remote operations. We want to run the factory like a field, lean field. We want to optimize performance, operations, safety for sure, and oh yes, we need to be profitable. However, the market realities are such, and this graphic that you see is taken from 2008, but I think we could all relate to it today as well, that these are issues that that company has to deal with, and by extension, those individuals that work for that company have to deal with. The reservoir economics graphic on the right was given to me in verbal form by the chief technology officer of one of the large super majors probably 15 years ago. And basically what he said is that as the field gets older, we have to deploy technology to drive our costs down faster than the decline curve of the field. Because if we can do that, we're profitable. If we can't, we're at a loss. So these are the kinds of things as we step back and say, okay, what is our customer trying to accomplish, whether he or she is in IT, operations, finance, safety, or wherever. What they're trying to do is maximize performance. We want agility, resiliency, and sustainability these days, and we want to maximize the value proposition for our shareholders. Now, these graphics are fine, but they don't have any numbers attached to them. There's a McKinsey study out, and you can Google McKinsey Operational Excellence, and you'll find it, where they state, and they do a good job in a lot of details, if you can generate world-class operational excellence, the value is up to 30% of your asset base. Well, if you're an oil company, your asset base are your reserves. If you're an engineering company, your asset base are your equipment, your people, and your intellectual property. So in today's market, we've laid off people, and there's more layoffs this week, I hear. We've closed facilities, we've stacked rigs, we've hunkered down for the long term, and there's not much left that an organization can do. We certainly cannot extract 30% of the value by going through this traditional path, but by attaining operational excellence and using technology, whether it's IT technology, IT or engineering technology, are line items in that McKinsey study that you can approach that 30%. That's a huge number. So that's not just profit. That's the price of the stock of a publicly traded company or the value of a private company. So the arguments that we'll make today is that technology implementations can be huge and the value can be demonstrated against these types of situations where people can relate to it. So talking about the role of the global account manager, or GAM. Now, if you don't have a global account, so you just have a Houston account, it's the same process. I really see that individual, and that's the role I had, as orchestrating the two ecosystems, the customer ecosystem on the left and the internal ecosystem on the right. If you look at my case with the instrumentation and with John, not only did I have to work through all of his people, he was a contractor to a refinery. The refinery had to sign off on it. The project manager had to sign off on it. His boss had to sign off on it, and his engineering staff had to sign off on it. And I had competitors. On my side, the company was not used to this kind of business. They had some ability to manufacture panels, like you saw, but not at the level that was that they needed. So we had to look at all those, and the company was based out of California. I was in Texas, so we had to work through all that. So it's really seeing this individual as managing all these different constituents and bringing them to the party, because you don't want to go sell something that your company says they can't deliver. I'm not going to spend much time on this because this is a subject in and of itself. You're probably aware that most large organizations have a gating process for their capital expenditure process. At the beginning, it's an idea. We need to retrofit a plant. At the end, it's finished and moved into operations. As they go through these 5 gates, they move from internal to key partners, and those key partners may be the large consulting firms or the large engineering firms. It may not be the suppliers at that point, although it could be. As you move into the design basis, there's solicited information from the supplier, so the specifications reflect what is available on the market. Somewhere in here is where it's probably desirable to engage with that customer. That's what I did with John and the instrumentation. I was probably in here, although I didn't realize it at the time. If you wait till you're here and you're looking for an opportunity to bid an AFE, you have probably lost that deal to someone who's been in here. Like I say, this is a major process. This is a pretty high-level diagram, and we can talk further about this at a later session, but it is important to know where you are in this process. So I want to shift gear a little bit. We've talked about the problem and some of the things that you can do, but how do we develop this economic value proposition and translate the technology to the language of business? How do we bring all those constituent parties along? This is mostly focused on the customer ecosystem, although not 100%. Sometimes there is a component to the organization itself. I've always liked this cartoon. Been around for a very long time, where the king is fighting the battle and he tells the salesman to come back later, I'm busy. Well, management's always busy. Even when times are bad like today, they're busy. When times are good and booming, they're busy. Moreover, if you have a disruptive technology, by definition, it's not well understood or perhaps hasn't even been seen before. You need a solution, though. The machine gun without the ammunition is really just another type of club. And a demo may help this rep as well. And the customer has got to be qualified. This king has an immediate problem. If he's living in Camelot and everything's fine, he probably does not have the immediate problem. I think the key message here is that management is always busy, and what we are trying to help them do to add value to their organization is not always clear to them. The traditional ways of selling. My coffee cup is better than your coffee cup. My computer is better than your computer. My TV screen is better than your TV screen. That doesn't really differentiate the television or the coffee cup and doesn't really cause a buyer to do anything. The other one more recently is I can increase your value by a large number, say 75% in this case. I would argue, and I've made these statements myself, but the answer is no, you probably can't. These kinds of statements are often overstated. They're usually not demonstrable, and they're certainly not defendable. Now, we're going to show you a way here today that you can overcome those three limitations. But so the challenge is not to go into the traditional feature, benefit, or value proposition model and claim value, but to demonstrate value. This is an actual benefit statement taken from a presentation of a mid-sized software company in the business process management space. It's a company with about 200 to 300 employees, so it wasn't a startup and it's not a major firm. I was asked to review their sales literature and I pulled out these red flags. Decreased human errors by 100%. I wonder how you can do that. 50% increase in daily processing of orders. Okay, does that generate 50% more orders or just get you done by noon? These kinds of statements I found to be relatively meaningless. And the question becomes, if you're the individual that made those statements in a sales presentation, has this company garnered do they trust you? And would they buy from you? And moreover, what is the credibility of the firm represented by someone making these statements? So you can see that casual off-the-cuff statements that don't have a lot of depth to them are the kinds of things that do not necessarily add value and can actually cause you to lose a sale because it's not believable. So what we want to do is turn technology into the language of business. So what's the language of business? It's money. It's the bottom line. There are four buying influences that I like from Miller Heiman. Again, I'm not endorsing Miller Heiman. I have taken their course several years ago, and I do like the buying influence model. The economic buyer, that's the decision maker. That's the individual that writes the check. That's the operations manager, the chief information officer, the CFO, the CEO, the board of directors, depends on what you're trying to sell. But that's the individual, and there's always only one. Even if it's a board of directors, there's only one entity that can sign the check. Technical. These are the recommenders. These can be engineers, they can be IT people, they can be inside the company, they can be outside the company. Most often, they cannot say yes, but they can say no. And so these people need to be addressed as well. Third is the user. Now you have to be careful with what the definition of a user is. It's not necessarily the person sitting in front of the computer screen or operating the piece of equipment. It could be their manager. I'll give you an example of this. Several years ago, we had a group come in that was going to do an assessment for us on the technology landscape that we were going to move forward with. So they went over to Lafayette, Louisiana, and interviewed users. And they came back with what looked to me like a wish list of toys. And so I asked them who they talked to, and they said they were out talking to the engineers on the truck. And I said, well, in my opinion, what you have here is what a group of young engineers would like to have, not necessarily what their district manager is willing to invest in to meet his bottom line. So while they were the user, the ultimate user in this case, in my opinion, was their manager, who was a little bit more mature in terms of the business processes and did understand better what we were trying to accomplish with the customers. The fourth individual, and it can be more than one, although it typically is one, is the coach. That individual can be a consultant, such as one of the big five groups, or it can be most likely someone inside the organization. But it is someone that will give you feedback. They'll give you an idea of where you are in the process. In the case I had with John, John became my coach. He was also the recommender to the project manager who signed off on that project. But he guided me through the process because once we had identified the value proposition to him, it was his best interest to do it. So as we translate technology to the language of business, keeping in mind these 4 different buying influences are individuals or groups that we need to specifically address. So I want to talk a little bit about how this evolved. About a decade ago, we were looking at doing a validation of a digital oil field, then of the digital oil field of the future, for a super independent brownfield. They wanted to invest $8 million on an old oil field. And that was before they put in all the sensors and at that time the wiring for the digital sensing solutions. We started out looking at this and developed this model as an early stage with them as a spreadsheet of a different list of the different values that various people would get, and I'll show you more about that later. One of the more interesting processes we did with an aerospace group is, and this is a published case study I can send you if you're interested, was security. What is the value of investment in security in North Africa? And we went through a process with that of looking at a lot of soft variables. This solution's been used many times from oil and gas to aerospace firms, nuclear power industry, and others. And it was done mostly as a consulting effort by a team that would go in there and look at these issues. One of the things that we were able to do is address the measurable value, but also directly address intangibles, which I'll show you a little bit about in the next few slides. So it became a consulting assessment for looking at large CapEx. The primary way we did this was to go through a problem identification and assessment with the client and develop a straw man. Nobody likes a blank sheet of paper, and I'll show you that in a minute why we don't do it that way. Put there a straw man or a working model, and then start the effort, the interactive efforts of working with them to come up with a final model that everybody believes in. The components of value are determined and measurable, both tangible and intangible, and the result is a financial model that when it goes to that group that can write the check, they understand exactly what the ROI is and the value proposition. We've identified 5 different components of value through the past 10 years that are pretty repeatable: cost takeout, avoidance, productivity and efficiency gains, one-time cash flow impact, and intangible. Intangible can be such as safety. One-time cash flow impact can be the eliminate of a redundant process, moving equipment off-site. If you only do it once, you don't get the value every year. Productivity and efficiency gains can be removal of bottlenecks, correcting process times, cost avoidance, correcting an engineering design flaw on the drawing board before you start doing the work. Cost takeout is redeploying non-value added activities. These are pretty consistent. We're not 100% with these, but throughout the past 10 years, they've been pretty consistent for the way people look at the problem. So I'm going to move into a quick demonstration here to show you a process that we have. What we've done with this consulting work is we've turned it into an online version, so it's software. And you'll see at the bottom a free version, which is what I'm going to show you, is available, and you'll be provided access to that at the end of this session. There's also an article that we wrote with Penwell a few years ago about the digital oil field, and there's some information on our website about the digital oil field. So let me move into the demonstration part of this right now. So this is our economic value proposition matrix model. This is the free version that is available. You'll see it's in a Dropbox format. I'll go through the 5 different tabs here in a minute. There is a quick start guide which you could link to. For purposes of time, I'm not going to go through, but you can see it has information on the system requirements, the different versions available, who should use it, how to use the solution, and how to navigate through all the different steps. So you can go step by step through this process. As I said, that's available online, so I'm not going to take your time with it today to go through that. So this is the start page. It puts together some basic information, such as the date, your name, email, and acceptance of the terms of the licensing agreement. More importantly, as we move into the economic input, part of what we're really trying to do is go back to that slide where we talked about, okay, what's the value to the individual who's in the field, who's in the financial office, who has a job to do that has nothing to do with our technology. He's simply going to use the technology as a solution. So there's a couple things. First off, we can select the type of revenue or production. You can see there's a number of different types here, and these can be customized as well. Price of the unit, in this case, barrel of oil, number of consumption or revenue per day, or volume of the units per day. You'll see everywhere that there's a blue, that's an input cell. If it's black, it's calculated. From a standpoint of operations, the different activities, in this case drilling, $250,000 a day, maybe still less on land. Possible damages, for example, loss of license to operate. And we see this when you get into safety issues these days with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement offshore. If you have a major incident like some have, that you're at risk of losing your license to operate. And that's not just $200,000, that's probably $20 million. Regulatory fees, whether it's OSHA, EPA, state and local, and you can legal action, personal injury or death, that certainly would be more than $1,000. So you can start to look at the different impacts that would happen here. So what I'm showing you is, okay, this is what if. Now, the model that you're looking at has some numbers pre-populated as opposed to a blank sheet of paper, but working with your client, and you'll see over on the right-hand side here, there's a real-time sync button. This is an online cloud-based solution. So I can, in fact, set this up and work with my colleagues or work with my clients. And as each individual makes a change that's audited, you can see who made it. So the iterative process of working through what if this and what if that is the real value here. Not necessarily that there's the answer to this, but there is an approach to it. Personnel, fully burdened cost typically includes salary, benefits, and other costs such as their operation, office or company car or whatever. Put the rate in here per hour for these different individuals, and you end up with a blended burden cost to get some idea. And you'll see why this information is important or adds value. Now, you don't have to use all of this. In some cases, it might not be appropriate to worry too much about the operations or the possible damages, but you can. So the next tab is total cost of ownership. Now, you see I don't have anything in here. And this is the way the free version comes, so you can fill it out. So if, for example, this is a software investment, we've got that in a license. If it's engineering, we may want to call this something else. Engineering IP that you might provide. The systems integration of these products and services, this is set up around numbers of users and subscription rates. This can be changed. Additional third parties. For example, those of you that are involved in information technology may have one of the big systems integration companies come in, or your own systems integration entity do the work. The company, the customer, is also going to have some internal costs, whether these are internal management resources or IT or engineering. I could spell. Those costs are not necessarily out-of-pocket costs because salaries are paid anyway, but often these are allocated to a project and those can be shown there. So you end up seeing a total cash investment, which is what it's going to cost your customer in out-of-pocket cash, and you also see what the internal costs are, the fully burdened costs are, so the internal and external. So this gives the company, your client, an understanding of what the total cost of ownership is over a 5-year period, which is typically good enough for most things, and that can be changed as well. One of the things that makes this tool unique is risk assessment. This particular version has 3 variables that you can change. The standard version has, I think, 10. And the way we've set this up to try and eliminate as much typing as possible is to show, okay, significant injury or fatality in this case, the cost of fines. Well, a fine for something like that may be $250,000. What's the likelihood you're going to have one this year? 21%, 69%, and you see that the expected cost changes. Hopefully it's way down here. And you can see the same for these others as well. If you have turnover because of issues, you got to train people. How much does that cost? You know, maybe it's $25,000 to train each person. And again, the same approach with the sliders. And again, the sliders are there to try and make your life simple. The real meat of this is the economic value assessment tab. You see that we pulled forward from the first page drilling and the cost of drilling. We're looking at, in this case, a discount rate for the net present value of 10%, which is typical. Obviously, that can be changed. Utilization from operations. Now, in terms of components of value, and remember we talked about the different components of value, those that are directly measurable, and I'll show you a little bit those that are not directly measurable. So, for example, in production increases, if we could increase throughput through cost takeout, and again, you can select your various items there, and also remember we talked about if you say, okay, I can save you 75%, the answer is you probably can't. Can you save facilities 5%? Yes. Can you save engineering 3%? Yes. Can you save HSE 3%? Yes. The answer may be at the end at 75%, but this enables you to go down that path where you can actually demonstrate to the client that this is where the value is. Now, if you work with the client to fill this out, they essentially are providing you, the seller, their internal numbers. So they are, quote unquote, buying into this process. And this does a couple things. It helps them be comfortable that this is a good value proposition. And then when they go to the economic value buyer and the chief financial officer in today's environment says, we don't want to spend $5 million, we can't afford it, they can demonstrate that if you spend that $5 million, the impact on the organization will be this, and I can document it. This makes me believable. It makes me something I can defend and something that I'm demonstrating to you. So again, we use the slider to deal with the assumptions. You'll see here where these first two are set up, you can't control each year. The standard version you can control each year like you do down here at the bottom with additional costs. So here we're trying to increase production. Here we're trying to save operational cost. So this is a plus and this is a reduction. Additional cost savings, since the shutdown part of the facility, we're only going to do that once. So in the first year, we're going to save $1 million. The likelihood of that is either 25% or 50%. Again, we're not looking necessarily for exact numbers. This is a what-if scenario for you and your customer to work through. Part of the real value of this particular solution is dealing with things that are not directly measurable, such as productivity increases and efficiency increases and intangibles. So as you see, if we go through here, and often what we do is we start with zero. We say, okay, we'll make the assumption that there's nothing that we can't measure that we can add value to, and oftentimes you'll see that the project will stand alone on the measurable variables alone. But what we can do is, based on our history, based on anecdotal evidence, based on best practices that we've seen in other clients, we can start to say, yes, we can in fact impact on issues. Now you see here that these numbers for year 4 and 5 don't change because I'm not showing any utilization rates up here. Obviously, this utilization of the facility you'd want to be much higher than 75%, but again, just for purpose of the demonstration. And you'll see that we have the same issues: production, operational excellence savings, and additional cost. And then finally, unplanned or downtime. Now you see these numbers here are coming from our risk assessment, and those are cascaded forward into the model. We can do one other thing. we can say, okay, what's the likelihood of this? Our license, lose our license to operate. What's the likelihood? I'm sorry, possible damage. What's the likelihood of this? In this case, we got 100%. Well, okay, maybe not. I've already said my expected value is 50%, but it might be 50% this year, and it might be 10% this year, and so forth and so on. So again, you can, or just leave them at 100 and just do, again, see what the impact would be based on the deployment of this particular suite of technology. In terms of possible damages, we go back to page 1, where we put together the economic input and looked at, okay, regulatory fines, legal actions, damage to the company's public relations, etc. Those can have real values impact as well. And we can put them in here, and again, we can control them down to 0. Or we can say, okay, we'll expect it to be, yes, if we have that impact, it's going to be 100% or somewhere in between. And again, like I said, we're trying to look at, okay, what's the relative impact of something that happened? Personnel reduction. We can measure reduction in headcount. What we can't directly measure is things like better morale. We can see it, but you can't go out there and say morale is better, so impact or the value is higher. But what you can do is say, well, if morale is better, people are going to be happier at work, they're going to be more productive, they're going to make less mistakes. Does that have a potential value to the company? And the answer is yes. And again, you can always leave it at 0 and say to management, say, well, we expect that we will get some benefit here, but we can't measure it right now. So at the end of the day, what we do is put together an economic value summary. Now you'll see that the investment is 0 because we didn't fill in anything, the total cost of ownership, but we can measure those things that are directly measurable. We'll put a value on those, and we can have a perspective on what the intangibles are, and then any personnel costs that are associated with it. So then the net present value at 10% for this particular project is positive. The financial guys will tell you that anytime it's positive, you should go, even if it's $1. In reality, companies like to see a very substantial net present value, and even then sometimes they challenge it. Like I said, you can work with your clients on this. When you're done, you can save it. You can always reset it back to the original model. And finally, for purposes of presentations, there's a dashboard that will have, and again, we don't have the total cost of ownership, but we do have the numbers that we put in here, excuse me, and some idea of what our value proposition is. And you can see in this particular case, because the impact on production is so great, the number is very high. Let me go back to my presentation. So I've just shown you this free version, which is available, and I'll see that you get the link to it. And as I said, there's additional information on our website about this particular tool. At this point, I appreciate your time, and if there's any questions, we can take a few minutes to answer them. You can go ahead and type them into the little question box. You know, I mentioned that this started as a consulting process. One of the things that I think is happening as we adapt to the smart technologies, the apps and the like, is I think it's possible to start to take a lot of the things that used to be expensive consulting engagement type processes and turn them into apps. And this is an example of where that was headed. I looked at putting this into a piece of software several years ago and could not find a way to adequately get it in there so that it could be used without the cumbersome nature of the way the thing had evolved. Because as we first started with it, we would sit down with the client in a room in a typical discovery process and go through this, which might take a whole day. And people didn't have time, took a lot of time to get back to them, a lot of iterations. But by putting this into the perspective that we have now as software, we are able to show customers and build these models as they're available, and one of the things that we've seen in our other practices is we don't have to go to a customer site anymore. We have used our operations management system, ORS, and done projects. And we're doing a project in Australia right now that I've never actually met the people. I'm in Houston. So I think that the technology's headed that direction. This is an example of that. Well, I see that there aren't any more questions, so I do appreciate everybody's time today. We will make this material available to you. And certainly if you have any questions after that, feel free to contact us. And I think as you start to use this tool and start to look at how you can change the way that perhaps you work with your clients, perhaps hopefully your sales will go up. I can tell you that in 1987, I was in the middle of an effort with a super major to sell them a large CAD/CAM system. And in the middle of that, because of the 1987 price issues, the price of oil, that entire team was terminated. I had to start all over again. We were able to close that deal because we were so far enough down the gating process that most of the sign-off had been done. One of the impact on that particular project was around mapping, and it did in fact save them tens of millions of dollars. So for those of you that are selling software or engineering type technology that often is said, well, we don't need it right now, we can't afford it, we're in a non-procurement environment. My personal experience is if you get to them in the right approach and identify the value proposition and use tools like I've showed you, that in fact you may be able to close that deal. Where selling large compressors and pumps and the like may be a harder sale than selling technology, because technology can be demonstrated to add value as we've shown today. So I thank you for your time. I will send this information out to you, and if there's any questions, feel free to contact me.